you so much for joining us. It's wonderful to be back, and we really did enjoy our break. And Paul and I were commenting that it seems like it's been a lot longer than 2 weeks, so that's always a good thing, I suppose. So we're really excited actually to talk about black and white tonight. It's definitely a topic that you know, all three of us actually have done considerable work in black and white, and so it's something that I think yeah, we've got a lot to contribute tonight, and hopefully everybody else really enjoys tonight. And I'll pass it over to Paul to maybe talk a little bit more about what his view on black and white is, and also introduce our guest Dex.
Yeah, well, thanks, Luke. Yeah, I was just saying, like, it feels like 3 weeks, not 2. But I think we originally started off thinking, oh, let's do 6 weeks of shows, and then all of a sudden we did 12, and we're probably just going to be continuing on. So we just had a bit of a break, which was great. So I feel very refreshed. We're doing a lot of judging at the moment, so a lot of awards, a lot of really highly refined imagery has been coming across my eyes lately, which has led me to be fairly inspired. And a lot of it has been amazing black and white work. I feel like, well, photography started as black and white, so when you're going back to the clear roots of what the genre sort of began in, then that's a really huge component of it. So the the originators of photography only worked in the world of tone and the world of lines and shapes. And they didn't have what some would argue the distraction of color to take away from the very basic structure and form of the world. And so it's quite refreshing as an image maker to pull away and kind of strip away that distraction sometimes, and really just dig deep into the structural elements of a place or a moment. There's lots of, it's a bit unique now. I started off in film days where that had to be a very deliberate decision before you started photographing, and that you had to use and choose the film that you wanted to photograph in, even the grain of the film. And so I grew up with sort of a deliberate process around that I already kind of shifted my mindset to how to shoot that way. And there is a shift in mindset that's required, because taking it, you can't just convert a color image to black and white and expect it to work. You get these amazing pops of red and green, and you're just blown away by that juxtaposition and turn it to black and white, and then they're just ribby slabs of gray that just blend into each other. So it just doesn't transition exactly like that. So the digital world has given us the option for both, that we can decide later even, or you can be a little bit clever on some cameras and actually switch the JPEG preview on the back of your screen to monochrome, so you can get a bit of a sense while you're shooting along. But now I find a lot of my black and white conversion comes retrospectively, which is quite a different process from film days when it was very deliberate and considered up front. So tonight we're going to share a bit of our own work and a bit of our inspirations, but our highlight for the night is Mr. Douwe Dijkstra, who is a fellow Netherlands man. If I'm sure many of you are familiar with Dex. Dex, you comfortable with calling a Dex tonight?
Yeah, perfect.
There we go, parfait. And he's got a gorgeous image from Iceland behind him, which I'm very jealous of. I'm about the only landscape photographer I know who hasn't been there yet.
No, really.
And Dex is an absolute maestro. He shoots almost purely in black and white, and he has an outstanding body of work, particularly on the metropolitan areas of Sydney and the life of Sydney as a whole. And we're almost actually commenting on one of our last shows that Dex was on, that he has a body of work that's contemporary enough to actually be historical in nature in terms of its cross-reference of modern culture in Sydney. But he's also traveled a lot of other places, and I'd say, I don't know, how much of your work is black and white, Dex?
I think 90%.
I was going to give it a percentage.
I take a lot of happy snaps as well that I post on Facebook that are just in color, but as in black and, yeah, everything's black and white. If I'm serious about photography, then it's black and white.
Oh yeah, well, you're kind of serious about it most of the time.
Yeah.
The Dex has won a plethora of awards. I remember God, how many years ago, Dex, was I judging one of the ones where you won? That was how we first met, I think, or I first got introduced to your work.
That was 2015.
Yeah, I remember that. I was just like, oh my God, who is this? And I reached out to him and said, how does he get this sort of timing, and how does he have the patience to find those shots? He does a lot of street-based, real-life sort of photography, but some of my favorite work of Dex's is I actually had to especially ask him tonight after he'd already organized a show to find some more, and that's his abstract architectural work, which I'm deeply in awe of and would very much love to have plastered over my walls. So yeah, Dex mainly uses his phone as his tool, and I think that makes it very accessible and not very easy, but it simplifies the process to the structure and the timing, I think, a lot more. Maybe Dex, you can probably talk about why you've chosen that medium, and I'll probably stop talking and just let you run with it, my friend.
Okay, I'll start my little presentation.
A bit more about yourself, Dex.
Yeah, that's part of the presentation.
Right. Just checking. I know you love talking about yourself.
No, not really. Okay, I'll share my screen. Oh,
Sorry, I haven't given you the permissions. That's
No.
a bit of a...
You need the permission.
That's terrible. No, you should be all good now, Dex. Sorry about that. Share away. Awesome.
So can you see my screen?
Yes, yep, all good.
Excellent. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me, guys. I'll tell you a bit about my monochrome world that I live in. I do appreciate a good color image, but I find it easier to capture the essence of a scene in mono, and I'll show you. A bit about myself. I'm originally from Holland. I was born in a little town just 150 kilometers north of Amsterdam. And this image you can see here is a beautiful sort of wintry image of one of the windmills in my hometown. I was just talking to the guys that it was really cold today in Sydney, but I actually do miss the days when it's -5 during the day and you walk through this beautiful winter wonderland. So it's sad I can't visit, but hopefully when all the borders go open again, I get to travel home in winter again sometime. So born in the Netherlands, and I studied graphic design in art school. And obviously you do sculpture and painting, but photography was a big part of it as well. So from an early age, I was interested in photography. So that being part of the curriculum was really good. And I had a lot of interest for photography, but graphic design became my subject. And I'm still a graphic designer. That's how I make my money. Love my job. So after I finished my studies, I moved to Amsterdam, where I got my first junior designer job and lived there for a couple of years. And I came to a point where I was like, I have a bit of money, maybe I should buy a car, or maybe buy an apartment or go traveling. And that's what I did. In 2001, I quit my job and traveled around the world for almost 1 year. And Australia was one of the main destinations. I traveled around Australia for half a year as a backpacker. And I've probably seen more of Australia than most Australians, because I went all the way around and through the middle to Tassie and back to the Red Centre and had an awesome time. I wanted to go to Australia because Skippy was one of my favorite shows on television when I was a kid. And both my mum and sister, they were really keen on watching the Flying Doctors. So that's where I got to see the Australian way of life. And I was really interested. And one of my mates was selling ice cream at Circular Quay. he was a backpacker, and he said, oh, they make it so easy for you to travel around in Australia. So like I said, in 2001, I packed my bags and started traveling around the world for a year and spent a lot of time in beautiful Australia. On my return to Amsterdam, just 5 minutes before I landed, I thought, oh, one day I would love to live and work in Sydney. So I saved some more money and came back and found myself a job, got sponsored. And I've been here for 16 years now, and I haven't looked back, because living in Australia has been fantastic. Haven't looked back. So I'm in Sydney. I'm a graphic designer, but I'm almost more passionate about photography than I am about graphic design. I think it all started when I was like maybe 10 or 11 or 12 years old, when I saw this little camera, my grandfather's camera. He unfortunately died when I was young, but I would have loved to share I would like to hear his stories about photography. And he liked architecture, he liked to travel, he designed his own house, and I think I've got a lot of his genes in me. I'm probably as bald as he was as well at my age. So yeah, unfortunately, he's not here to help me or guide me, or I can't talk with him, but I've got a lot of him in me. So that camera started it all. From a young age, I was taking photos with just a pocket camera, and it became like my first camera was like a proper camera, was a Praktica film camera, and then I bought a Canon. And I basically took photos during family holidays, and the graphic designer in me already started to pop up as well, because I was always doing the albums, and I really engulfed myself in photography and photo albums and graphic design. It all got sort of serious when I bought my first DSLR camera. That was in 2009. Also at the time, social media became very important, and living in Sydney, I met a lot of photographers that sort of were meeting in the city and doing sunrise shoots, and there was online groups, and I joined them, made a lot of friends, and I got really serious, and I got really inspired by all these other photographers. And being a bit more, getting more into photography, I really started to focus on black and whites, and especially with my new DSLR and a tripod, I was really intrigued by long exposures. So during the DSLR years, I call them, I shot a lot of mono long exposures. And this image, for example, is the pool at Coogee, one of my favorite ocean pools here in Sydney. It's got beautiful curved lines, and I love the cement blocks. And I remember this was a very, very stormy late afternoon. I was there all by myself. Nowadays, it's really hard to find a popular place where there's nobody else, no other photographers, but I was very lucky. And I remember the day that I was really happy there in the storm, and it was raining, and I captured all the waves, and I got wet feet and my camera almost drowned. But yeah, that was a beautiful day, and I captured this. I love this long exposure. It's one of my favorites. So did a lot of that. It all changed in around 2013 when the iPhone made an entrance and Instagram became popular. I was always struggling with my photography, with the technical aspect of it. I really enjoy taking photos, but the thing I hate is enjoying a really beautiful morning, watching the sunrise, and then go home and spend hours and hours looking into my screen, looking at pixels and moving sliders endlessly from left to right to get it right. And I didn't really like that whole process of post-processing, and it freaked me out, and I'm not very technical, and it took the sort of fun out of photography. And all of a sudden there was the iPhone, and I was able to take a photo with my iPhone without having my bag, my tripod, my filters and everything. And I was able to take pictures on the go, process them really quickly using the Instagram app and choosing a particular filter that I thought was really suitable for all my images. And I could basically forget about the whole post-processing time and do everything on the go. And I usually process my images in 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 seconds. I'm really quick doing that. So I was really happy just having the camera on me all the time and posting on Instagram and processing on my phone. And I haven't looked back. And because of that, I've became really invested in street photography. So a bit about my photography. It's been a lifelong passion, because as soon as I saw my grandfather's camera, I was intrigued, and it's become my creative outlet. And basically it's the best hobby in the world. For a lot of people, they want to become professional photographers, but that's absolutely not what I want. I just want creative freedom. I'm dealing with budgets and clients and deadlines in my work as a graphic designer. In my photography, I just want to be a free agent, and I want to do what I want to do. And nobody's going to tell me what to do. And I want to be as creative and happy as possible. Being a creative, I feel the pressure, but I also want to be creative and original. So I'd like to approach certain locations from a different angle, or try to do something different. That's my challenge in photography, being creative. And I feel that pressure being a creative, being in the creative industry, but at the same time, it's what I love doing as well. I'm very intuitive in my approach. I trust my intuition. I know that something will happen because I know that at a certain time, late afternoon, the sun will be at a lower point and it will create beautiful shadows and lights. And I'll be able to catch something interesting. So obviously there's days where when nothing happens and you feel a bit flat and the light is low. But I always am sure that something will happen, and eventually I will be happy with the shot. So very intuitive. I don't really think about compositions, that just comes to me. But again, technically, my technical ability is close to zero. It doesn't interest me. It probably frightens me. But I get away with it because my intuition and unique eye and being different makes it sort of not an issue that my images aren't technically perfect. Sometimes it's actually better. That technical imperfection can make an image a little bit better. So I'm not sliding like these sliders from left to right aimlessly looking at pixels. I'm just trying to capture something special, look at it, this is okay, and I'm happy with it, and I post it. And that's how I rock and roll, basically. So no technical skills. I know what a telelens is, I know what a macro lens is, but when I take people out on street walks, and I do that occasionally, I always tell them, don't ask me any questions about 2.8 or 4.6 lenses, because I have no idea what you're talking about. I can tell you how I look through my lens and what is interesting and looking at lights, but technical ability, no. I could probably learn a lot if I really forced myself to dive into the whole technical aspect of photography, but Like I said, maybe I'm too scared, but I'm also not interested because it's not my happy place. So
Well,
like,
Dex, you talk a lot about what you don't know, but if anybody sees your work would obviously feel quite different. How do you feel like you've learned what you have? How do you feel like you've refined that knowingness about your compositions? Because we're not all necessarily just born with an intuitive knowingness with composition, and sometimes you've got to learn it. So I don't know whether you feel like it's just through practice or it's through inspiration, or you know, what you feel actually brought your what has progressed your photography forward more than anything else. If it's not a technical side of things, how has it developed?
I think it's the freedom of the instant photo rather than having to think and technically perfect it in the post processing. So that really took the fun out of the photography. So me being just free, just holding my iPhone, that's my camera, and 9 out of 10 the shots are not so, but there's always that 1 or 2 images that are really special. And it's just because I'm very, very intuitive and can react at a certain point really quickly to capture a certain thing I'm seeing.
Yeah, my sense with the work in
freedom.
particular, Dex, if you don't mind me saying, and I remember it catching my eye immediately when I was judging your set, is the phenomenal sense of timing. And I was lucky enough to go on one of these walks with Dex. He gave me a one-on-one guided tour, and one thing that struck me is a lot of these images can only be created by someone that has the patience to wait for those moments to arrive. So you set up the scene and create the container for it to be held in, but the moment needs to arrive. Is that something you find sometimes in the way you work?
Sometimes, like you said, I have to be very patient because I know that there are certain spots here in the CBD of Sydney that when the sun is at a certain height during winter, that it can create beautiful shadows and silhouettes. And I just have to wait for a person to walk in the right spot for that to happen. And then obviously it's better then for example, it's a woman with a beautiful dress or a guy with a beautiful hat to add that extra,
I've got a question from Rosie. Do you shoot in color and convert?
Sorry, I had some technical difficulties, but I'm back. Do I shoot in colors? Most of the time I make sure that my setting is in mono, but I don't have to sort of teach myself to look through the lens and see a mono world. I know what is going to work and what is not going to work in black and white. Sometimes when something happens and I have to really quickly get my camera, I just shoot in color because there's no time, because that extra second or two I might miss a beautiful moment that I just witnessed or that is about to happen. So it doesn't really matter. If I convert a photo from color to black and white, I already know that it will work in black and white, and that's a pretty quick sort of thing to do. I don't spend a lot of time tweaking when I do the conversion.
Yeah, no, I've watched you do it. It's pretty fast. But
Yeah.
what's beautiful about it is it doesn't look like that. It looks, however simple your process is, it looks very considered and very, like it has a very clear style to it for me. Like I can almost see your images through that consistency, partly of processing, and then obviously more so the way you see. But it's always intrigued me just how quick your process is. And it's unlike most people's, I'd say.
Yeah, and I'm very envious of it as well because you know, as someone that takes forever to edit anything, Dex has already posted it before I've even downloaded the card. And then I think Dex and I did a trip to Iceland, probably I think it was 2016, and I think I'm still editing some of those shots right now. And Dex is he posted them. He was already done by the time the trip was finished, well and truly. So there's certainly some merit to doing that in terms of getting the work out there. So definitely.
But I envy you guys that you are so, your technical skills, I'm really envious of those. But for me, it just doesn't work.
When you're what is it that you're looking for when you're walking around, say you're around the Opera House or around the Harbour Bridge in Sydney, and you know what has to catch your eye, I suppose, for you to see a photo there?
Well, photography is all about capturing beautiful light. So if the light is beautiful, then that's a bonus. But it could be just a moment when a person walks past, or I've set myself this challenge in Sydney that I want to capture both the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House in the one frame without it being a double exposure or trickery. So that's one of my challenges in photography I've set myself. And if I, for example, on a Sunday afternoon think, okay, got nothing else to do, this is what I want to do, and I just walk into town and go to Circular Quay in the Opera House and try to find sort of a new take on the Opera House or Harbour Bridge. That's, again, is wanting to be creative and different and looking for different angles. And sometimes nothing happens, but the other week I found another reflection where I can basically see the bridge reflected in a piece of glass, and I look through the glass and I, see the Opera House. So that's sort of a new find, and I get really, really excited.
Yeah, I'm always in awe, I suppose, of your ability to find different places to find reflections, and sometimes you seem to even use like pylons, or if there's a very reflective bench, or just places that I wouldn't really even consider. And I suppose in some ways using the phone makes it a bit easier to use those sort of objects for those reflections because of just the sheer size of the device. So.
Yeah, I have a little section on reflections, and like you can create beautiful images using reflections in water or steel or glass. I have a few examples of that.
Oh, well, maybe we
let's have a look at some more images, Tex.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've put them sort of in categories. So first, photography is all about capturing beautiful light. So I love stark contrast and striking silhouettes and dark shadows. Again, I'm a creative, so I force myself to find unique takes and on unusual angles to shoot certain locations. And I was referring to the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge. I love layered compositions. I love depth of field and having something in your foreground all the way to the background of your image. And as a graphic designer, I love graphic shapes. I love strong lines and shapes and circles and squares and patterns that really catches my eye. Reflections, I'm keen on reflections. There's so many different surfaces that can help you with it. There's steel, there's glass, and there's puddles as well. And the most important is those decisive moments. Often you go into town for example, I'm doing street photography, so I'm going into town and I sort of think, oh, this is going to be a nice place, or that's a new building, or that might inspire me, or the right light is happening in a certain location. But sometimes there's these moments where you're in the right place at the right time, and those images, you can't wake up in the morning and think that's what I'm going to shoot. So those surprising moments are the best when you are able to capture those. So beautiful lights, again, stark contrast. This is in front of St. Mary's Cathedral.
Oh, really. Sorry to interrupt, Dex. Is there a way you can make it full screen just so we can enjoy them a bit larger? Maybe view the top view full screen or something like that?
Yeah, as soon as I saw that image, Tex, I felt like it could be 100 years old. It's just absolutely and utterly timeless.
Is it better, Luke?
Yeah, that's a bit better, yeah.
Yeah. Just a second.
And Tex's work is consistently quite high contrast. That's one of the aspects of style that really speaks to me about Tex's work. He's not afraid to to give that a good hard nudge. You know, it does not fade for the blacks to be black and the whites to be white.
Yeah, that is something that, like previously in the DSLR years, I would just go into that really dark area of St. Mary's Cathedral and make certain elements pop. But it doesn't interest me because the darker, you get a beautiful silhouette and the waterfall is catching the light. So that gives it a beautiful, beautiful contrast. So I don't mind that it's a bit grainy. That's one of the main, what's it called? The main filter I use. It adds a bit of contrast to my images and a bit of grain. That sort of makes it look less perfect, but I like that sort of style.
Yeah, gives it a very film look, I feel, Dix, to me.
It's very candid as well, and all my photography is very candid. So from the hip, like really quick, I see something click and I've captured it, rather than setting up a tripod and doing 5-minute exposures. So yeah, all very quick.
Dex, I got another question. Because you sort of were heavily influenced by that transition into social media, and in the earlier days, and Instagram in particular, it was totally square focused. Do you feel like that's really influenced your compositions and that you think and look a lot in squares as opposed to other formats?
I think the square format elevates whatever image you shoot to a different level. It's not a portrait, it's not a landscape, so it becomes something by itself. And especially the long exposures look more sort of fine arty in a square, and a square crop is more difficult as well than a landscape or portrait. So yeah, I've often loved the square format more than any other format. I'm not really sure why, but it's that fine art look that I really liked in the beginning of my long exposures, and it really suited the square. And with Instagram, everything was square. There was no opportunity to do anything that was portrait or landscape, so that suited my idea really well as well. So this is an image at Dudley Page Reserve, one of my favorite views in town. It's in Vaucluse, and this is one of these moments where I know that at the end of the day, the sun is really low, and if there's something in between me and the sun, it will create a beautiful silhouette. And there was a guy, often I go there and there's nothing happening, there's no people, but sometimes like this guy was doing laps of the park, and I asked him to just run in front of the camera. And at first he didn't want to be in my photo because he thought he was being rude because I was taking photos. But I quickly asked him, like, can you just walk in front of me? So, and he didn't really understand what I was doing, but I was taking photos of him in front of the sun, trying to capture a silhouette of him running in front of the city. And what I do is I just keep I keep clicking the camera. So you take like 10 images in like a second, and you basically, you cross your fingers and hope for the best. And this one came out with a beautiful silhouette and a beautiful sun flare. So this is one of the moments where like you're very happy that this happened. It's not something that you think in the morning, this is what I'm going to shoot. I knew this was possible, but it came out like so much better than I anticipated. So really happy with this. And it's all about the light and what it does. And there's depth of field. Depth of field, like I said, I find it really interesting as well. And yeah, it's one of my favorite spots in the city, and you can see the city in the background and the harbor bridge. And it creates this beautiful sun flare. Photography is all about capturing light. This is another one. This is Meriwether Bats. High contrast, like there's lots of blacks, lots of whites. And I just had to be very on point to capture the guy touching the blocks at that particular moment. So
do you crop it all, Dex, or that would have actually been the frame?
Because at the time I was shooting in squares, so often I crop a little bit, but most of the time, yeah, I don't spend a lot of time cropping. This was, I was working full-time in the CBD, and I went on, like if I had a bit of time during lunchtime, I would do my lunchtime street photography, just to forget about work and relax on a busy day. And this was just on the corner of the MLC Center, where there's beautiful dark parts and light in between the concrete jungle. You can see the light on the guy's head and creating beautiful contrasty image.
Stunning, Dex.
And you can also get the light reflected off the buildings too, and really intensify the light in certain points too.
Yeah,
It's quite dynamic in the lower parts of the day when the sun's lower. Sorry.
Dex, we had a question earlier about browns and greens and the challenge of converting those particular tones to black and white. I kind of responded saying we could maybe overcome that by the strength of contrast and light, but do you find certain colors just really don't work in your conversion to black and white, or do you just have
that's not on my radar at all, because I'm using high contrast, so maybe some colors that convert to sort of dirty grays, that doesn't really happen. And I'm always on the lookout for really clear lines and shapes. That sort of imperfection doesn't really bother me. It has never bothered me.
We also had a request, because one of the ways that we will talk about later is learning to think of black and white is quite a process, because the world presented in front of you is generally in color. Do you have a means that you can preempt how it looks on your screen in black and white? Like some people are asking with phone photography, is there a setting for monochrome somewhere that you can convert it to so you can be looking at it that way, so to speak?
No, I guess it's when you look through your viewfinder and your camera is set to mono, then your world will look completely different. So you'll have to look for lines and contrast, and there's no beautiful sunrise or sunset to blind you or disguise that your composition maybe is weak or whatever. You have to look at your subject and how do I want to shoot it.
That's interesting that, and you say in some ways black and white is less forgiving compositionally, because I guess it's leaning a lot harder on composition in some ways.
Yeah, again, composition comes natural to me, so I don't really have to think about that. When it comes to technology, that's where I struggle. But again, like I said, I use it to my advantage. The way I process my images really quickly, and the sort of filter I use to hide the imperfections.
Tex, do you feel like the phone is in some ways a superior tool for street photography because it's so unassuming around people and the way they respond to it? Because so much of your work is in high volume people sort of places. And I know I personally struggle to pull out a big camera in that environment in terms of the way it changes the way people interact with me and almost makes me feel uncomfortable. Do you feel like a phone sort of transcends that a lot more because it's so common and just so compact and so expected, I guess?
It's less intrusive, and people may look at somebody with I call it a proper camera and a tripod and all the filters as like, ooh, they're taking photos. I can be sort of in the background taking photo and nobody will actually notice that I'm there. Whereas when you have your camera, then you're more in people's peripheral, in people's vision. So I can sort of stand behind other people, and I'm basically not there, but I know exactly what I want to shoot. And often, for example, it's less intrusive if you have just your camera. There's still places, even in Sydney, where I walk into, for example, the ANZ building, where you can't even take a photo with your iPhone because you're not allowed, and security will come at you and say you're not allowed to take photos. So even with an iPhone, it can be you can be asked to just not take photos. But with a big camera and setting up your tripod and working with filters, and you're a bit more visible for other people.
Let's see more. See more.
So this is that's one of those that challenge that I've set myself to capture both the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House in the same frame without doing any Photoshop wizardry or double exposures. You can see the Harbour Bridge, actually the shadow of it on the sail. So that's my way of capturing both icons in the one frame. And this one was taken from the Manly Ferry. This is another one where I have the bridge and the Opera House in the same frame. These are people that are climbing the bridge, and you can see the sails of the Opera House on the other side of Circular Quay. This is another late afternoon. Late afternoons are beautiful when the sun is really low, and it created this beautiful, like the stars in the water and the beautiful silhouette of both the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House. Late afternoon is perfect for photography because the light is so beautiful. And this is from Milson's Point, from the ferry wharf. This is on a very rainy day, and that's when I get really excited because clear blue skies can be sometimes really boring. So when the weather's really bad, let's go out, and this is shooting through a piece of glass at the wharf. So all the water makes this look like it's sort of an underwater image, but it's taking a picture through a glass, a plate of glass at the wharf on a very rainy day. So I thought that was a very original image of both the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge. This is another angle, like a different angle. This is again one of these moments where you just have to wait for people to walk in the right spot. Sometimes that's within 5 minutes, but I've waited an hour and a half. For example, there was a Monday I was at the Melbourne Convention Centre, and there wasn't a lot of people, and there was this beautiful mosaic floor, but there was just nothing on, and I had to wait a long time for a person to walk into the right spot. And here, obviously, at the Opera House, there's so many people, and I didn't have to wait long. But I always try to have sort of a human element in my images, and they also add a sense of scale. And this is, like I said, like a different angle.
Do you ever get people coming up to you asking you if you're okay or something, if you're crouched over a bench for a few hours and trying to work out what you're up to?
Yeah, some people look at me, what a weirdo, but I don't care. I have this image in mind and I don't care. Some people actually ask, what are you doing? Especially with this sort of technique where I hold my camera, like, for example, on top of a bollard, because it's a sort of a steel surface and capturing the reflection. And I just show them what I'm doing. Then, oh, that's what you're doing. Then they still think I'm a weirdo, but yeah, that's okay. I'm enjoying my photography. That's what it's all about. And I'm trying to find these new angles and reflective surfaces to come up with something unique and different anyway. So yeah, some people, they are really surprised when I show them what I'm actually doing, and other people just, okay, weirdo. They will pass. That's okay with me. This is another one of those images where I think it was in January after the bushfires, and the city was covered with smog and it was really hot. And this was one of the first days where the rain had come and the temperatures sort of dropped, and I was able to get out of the house and actually feel the rain on my arms, and felt like, oh, finally I can breathe again. So I wanted to sort of capture Sydney in the rain. So that was my take on, you can see a faint Opera House in the background. That was my take on, okay, finally we're sort of past this horrible month of bushfires and smog and heat. So it was nice to be out again. This was taken a long time ago. I think it was an iPhone 4. So obviously I've got a 10 now, so there's more pixels, so the quality is a lot better. But with my iPhone 4, I zoomed in a lot, so there's not a lot of pixels. And again, it's technically not perfect, but the atmosphere, I was so happy that I was able to shoot the bridge in the fog. It was one of those unassuming mornings where I was working in the rocks. I was on the train to Circular Quay, and I arrived and I could see the fog, and I was like, oh my God. I always wanted to capture this, and I couldn't believe my luck. And again, my iPhone 4, not the best quality, but it's one of my favorite images. And I was like 3/4 of an hour late for work, but I texted them and they knew I was into my photography, and they were all laughing, and I was so happy with the shot. And I just worked back an extra hour to make up for the time that I was late. But yeah, very lucky to walk into that scene.
Stunning, Dex.
This is from Circular Quay, and another take of the Harbour Bridge, Circular Quay railway station. Again, shot through the glass on a beautiful, some say really bad rainy day, but I thought it was a beautiful day for photography. And again, I waited for the Manly ferry to appear in the shots. So again, a creative, different way of shooting the Harbour Bridge, because it's been shot like a gazillion times, and the Opera House has been shot a gazillion times. So I always try to find a different way of shooting it and keeping myself entertained and yeah, enjoying my hobby. Another thing, again, the creativity is the Wanaka tree. I myself, I've done the long exposure, but this is my street photography take on the tree. So again, trying to be different. I've never seen a shot like this because everyone is sort of doing the same shot. That's not true, but there's lots of beautiful images of the tree, but it's hard to be original. And I thought like this is a different way of shooting the Wanaka tree, that famous tree.
Do you sometimes use burst mode, Dex, to capture the moment, or is it literally just you tap it once and you try and time it as best you can?
No, I use it often because if somebody runs past or walks past, or the camera goes tick, 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 and I hope for the best. Like then if I shoot 50 photos, that hopefully one is exactly right. And sometimes I miss out, and sometimes, like the sun flare, one of the earlier images, I'm really happy that the camera actually was able to capture what I saw in a perfect way. So yeah, I often use that.
Tex, how do you, some of your images appear to have a lot of depth of field, and I personally find that quite difficult to control in cameras. I know they have a portrait mode on some of the iPhones that gives a depth of field, but that won't work with a physical structure. It has to be a face. So, and is it just because your foreground is just so close to the front element of the lens that you get depth of field on the back, or is there some other way you get it?
Well, if you point your in my case, my iPhone at a scene, you can tap on the screen, and that area you tap will be your focus. So I use that every now and then. So that earlier image with the water drops on the steel with the Harbour Bridge in the background. So I make sure that the foreground, I tap on that area in my viewfinder on my screen, and that is going to be sharp. So a very easy way of having something sharp in the foreground, and the background is all soft and unsharp.
That's definitely one of the things that has been improved a lot in mobile phones these days, is the quality of the out of focus areas, and that they're really trying to make it look more like it's a much larger sensor than it actually is. And I think there's quite a bit of processing and different lens designs that they've gone through to be able to provide that look.
Yeah.
So did you wait for the person to be standing there? And is that a person in the window?
Yeah, that's the Church of the Good Shepherd, and another one of those iconic places that a lot of people shoot. And this is my take with a dramatic sky, and the sun was peeking through the clouds. And I knew that when somebody opened the door, you could see the cross, and I waited for somebody to walk through the door, so to have their little silhouette and the cross in the doorway visible. So that's my take on the Church of the Good Shepherd. So waiting and actually seeing what the possibilities are. So I often walk around, how am I going to do this differently, or what is it, a creative way or a new angle? And I spotted the cross when somebody opened the church door, and that's where I saw my opportunity, and that's how I composed my photo.
It's a shame that they've changed it so much now. I was just there in February, and now there's a big, large fence around the whole church, and it's very hard to get even close to the church. But the previous visits, you could walk inside the church and all around it, and yeah, it's going to make it very hard for astrophotography there and a few other things. So it's also a bit of a case in point of, you know, you never know what's going to change, and so you really got to get these shots while you can.
Yeah, yeah. It's a shame, but they have to protect the location as well from all the people.
Yeah.
So I talked about like layering in compositions and depth of field. For example, here the type is so close you can almost touch it, and then you've got the people on the platform and the train disappearing in the background in the end of the tunnel. So there's a great depth of field in this image. And again, I like my graphics. I love the type in this composition, and the circle, and then the museum sign. And again, I waited for people to walk in the right spot, and obviously I waited for a train. So depth of field, you can do a lot when you use that technique. This is one of my favorite buildings here in Sydney, the Queen Victoria building. You can see all the levels, like people shopping, people having lunch. You can see the escalators. You can see the beautiful Aboriginal motif in the mosaic tiles. One of my favorite buildings, and there's always something happening. And again, like 4 layers in the one composition. This is just a handrail I saw, and I saw the Anzac Bridge and the Sydney Harbour Bridge. So I found the right angle to shoot all 3 in the one image.
Do you tend to use your zoom a lot, Dex, or you just kind of go with treat it almost like a prime lens and use your feet as the zoom?
With using the zoom, you lose a lot of quality, a lot of pixels. So I try not to use it. Sometimes I use it, and then I get back home, and the image quality is not all that good. That's one of the negative aspects of just using the iPhone. Again, as a proper camera, you can print your prints really, really big, and I'm sort of limited in how big I can print my images because there's a limit to my pixels.
Have you thought about going with a camera that, like some of the newer smartphones that have 50 megapixel sensors and things like that, and then that's actually not a limitation?
Yeah, I wish I could afford a new camera every year, but that's just not the case. And again, that technical aspect, sometimes it limits me, but it's more about the capture. So when I was here, it was all about the swimmer in the foreground and the handles, like the steel handles, and the boardwalk and the fence and the harbor and the skyline. So I get all these elements in my frame, in my composition, rather than it being the most perfect, technically perfect image. And this is also one of these moments where you have to ask a person if they're happy to be in the photo. Often my images, there's people in like they're appearing as silhouettes or dark shadows, or they're just passers by. But this was actually a moment where I had to ask the person if they were happy to be in my image, and I showed them my image and they were okay for me to post it on social media. Often, like, I use a lot of little silhouettes and to add sense of scale in my images, but here I had to basically ask, okay, are you okay for me to take a photo, and are you okay for me to post it on social media? And it was all okay. Graphic shapes. I love all these graphic shapes in architecture, in mosaic tiles. And this, for example, is at the Dandy Cinemas at Circular Quay, where you walk up the stairs and you can see people walking across this beautiful mosaic of the sun or a star. Yeah, you can, again, I had to wait for a few people to walk in the right spot, but if I have the time, I'm happy to wait for an hour if I have to. And I finally got these two women to walk in the area where I wanted them to walk. Often you have to wait, but I was lucky. So I love all the curves and lines and shapes. This is inside the ANZ foyer in the city. The light flooding through the glass, you get all these beautiful lines and high contrast and shapes. And again, I waited for a person to walk in the right spot to add a sense of scale and the human element. This was in Japan. I was really struggling in Japan because it's sensory overload. There's so many things that you can see. And for the first 2 days, I was struggling. I didn't know really what to capture. And all of a sudden I saw this stop sign on the road, and I had these office workers in my frame. And I was like, oh, finally, I've got a picture that is sort of representative of Japan. This is one of the theaters in Melbourne, a beautiful building, especially I've never seen it at night, but the tubes, they glow, and it's actually a black building. And for sense of scale, I put like a little person. And often if a person walks in front of it and it's wearing dark clothes, then you won't see them. So I had to wait for actually somebody in a light shirt to walk past. So there was a lot of waiting involved in this image, but finally there was somebody with a white shirt that walked into my frame. So I'm very happy with that. This is surprising reflections. I'm always on the lookout for reflections. And you mentioned this, Luke. This is Milson's Point, where I actually put my camera really close to the top of a bollard, like a metal bollard, and it created this reflection of the fence and the opera house and the two people. You have to be really precise, because if you're 1 millimeter too low or too high, you won't get that reflection right. And this is one of these moments where people look at me, what's that guy doing? And then I show them, oh, that's what you're doing. And then they might still think I'm a weirdo. But when I found this shot, I was so happy that I found something new and different. And that's the challenge I set myself. And yeah, when I get a photo like this, and when I see these opportunity, and I'm always on the lookout for reflections and different angles. And yeah, it's a great spot where you can create beautiful reflections. And I use glass and I use puddles to get reflections.
Dex, I'll just interrupt you there. Just had a question from Ricardo de Cunha. He just wants to know how you find the lens diffraction of the Canon f2.8 50mm lens at the widest aperture.
Okay, I'll just get my book for photography technology.
Sorry, mate. No, he was just wondering what feelings does photography bring to you? What does it mean to you?
Basically, what I do, it is documenting my life. What I create is my personal photo album, and it's also a way of sharing my life here with my family back home. And I can share my life, and it's just a pure hobby, and it really makes me happy. And I'm really happy to be able to create these images. There's nothing more than that. Nowadays you can share your images so more people can see it, but it's basically my photo album of my life here in Sydney and when I go traveling.
That's pretty awesome.
And I love exploring, I love to travel, and I walk around Sydney a lot, and I try to go to new suburbs, and I document where I go. And if I'm, for example, in Newtown, there's always new street art, or Marrickville, or when I walk Bondi to Coogee to Watson, there's always something new happening. So it's documenting my day, documenting my life. It's basically my it's a diary as well. So
and I have to say too, after you've walked around Sydney so much, You've been quite a bit of an expert at where some of the most interesting parts of Sydney are, and you even do photo walks here and there, don't you, Dex, just to show people around and maybe see parts of Sydney that they'd never considered before.
Yeah, I love showing people around and sharing how I look through my camera and share, for example, that what I call the bollard technique, and show them what you can do with reflections, and show them where how I take my photos and how I look through my lens and how I compose my images. And for example, I've been to the Queen Victoria building a million times, but when I go there with a group, there's always one person that points their camera at something. I'm like, what are you taking a photograph of? And I'm like, really? I've never seen that place or that object or that composition before. So I'm always amazed by how many things you can see, and we all have a different eye as well. So yeah, I love showing people around, and like I do tonight, I'm happy sharing my sort of secrets. I don't have any secrets, and I just tell them how I take photos and how I enjoy it. So this is another reflection of one of the restaurants, North Sydney, Milson's Point, where you use the glass. So the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge are reflected in the window, and you can actually see through the window. So you get, there's no trickery, it's not a double exposure, it's what you see reflected in the glass, what is behind you, and what you can see through the glass. So you get this really weird, sort of surprising world you're looking at. This is at Martin Place. This is inside number 1 Martin Place, where I'm looking through a glass window towards Martin Place, but the escalators behind me are reflected in the glass. So again, you get these two worlds morphing into one. And this was one of those surprising moments. I'm actually taking a picture through a bus that is driving in front of me, and you can look through a bus because it's got 2 windows. So I can actually see through the bus that is in front of me. It was actually like half a meter in front of me. So I sort of wanted to take a picture of Town Hall reflected in the bus window. But it turned out that what was behind me was reflected in the window of the bus, but I could actually see through the bus when I took that image. And you can actually see York Street. So the bus is in front of me. I'm looking through the 2 windows of the bus, and I can see what is behind me, Town Hall reflected in the glass. So again, no trickery. It's one of those moments that happens using reflections.
Fantastic. Oh.
So this is that other category, as in decisive moments. There's no way in the world where you have your coffee in the morning and you think, I'm going to take a picture on at Dudley Page Reserve, where a couple of guys are playing soccer. There's a beautiful sun, there's a skyline, there's the Harbour Bridge, there's a plane, there's a guy throwing a ball in the air, and somebody doing a handstand. You can't think that you can say, oh, I'll take a picture of a building or a beach or whatever, but you can't think of this sort of happening. And it did happen on one of my walks, where I asked the guys, because I knew, again, at the end of the day, the sun was low. If I had, it would create beautiful silhouettes, and it had the skyline, and I just needed the foreground things to happen in my frame. And there were these guys playing soccer, and I asked them, is it okay if I take a few photos, because I saw the potential? And they said, yeah, okay. They obviously thought like, I'm weirdo, but at the end of it, I showed them the images, and I came away with this image. And yeah, it's one of my favorite shots, where I was basically on lying in the glass taking photos, and I think I took like 100, and my camera went like tick, 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 tick. And there was this one image where the guy was doing a handstand and another guy was throwing the ball in the air.
Dex, we just had a question as well. Have you ever used a tripod with your phone? I know you used to use it with your DSLR. Is it something that you may have thought of experimenting with, maybe with long exposures or multiple frames, that sort of thing?
I've tried that like a couple of years ago, where I found an app that you can actually do long exposures on your iPhone. And I used one of these extra lenses that you can screw on your iPhone as well. But at the time, it was all very plasticky, and you could actually, the quality of the image wasn't really good. And the app that I used for long exposures, it wasn't really a very smooth image in the end. It was very, you can see the staggered way the phone or the app was taking photos. So the quality wasn't really good, and yeah, no, I don't use it at all anymore.
Yep.
So this is again one of those images where I had to zoom in, so the quality isn't right. But it was on my birthday, and I was on a bus, one of these tourist bus to the 12 Apostles on my birthday, and there was horizontal rain. It was a dreadful day, and I was like, what am I doing here on my birthday? It's going to be very bad, and yeah, what am I going to see at the 12 Apostles? And I'm like, well, it's not going to be good. But when I was there, finally, after we stopped like a million times for pies and sausage rolls, I'm like, I want to go to the 12 Apostles. So we got there, we had like 20 minutes to walk around, and I was like, how am I going to document this? I want to take a photo, and there was gale force winds and horizontal rain, and I was like, how am I going? And all of a sudden I saw this girl with one of these big plastic raincoats, and it was flapping in the wind, and it was making a lot of noise, and it was like, oh, that's my photo right there, because that's how I can document what the weather is like at the 12 Apostles. And it was like 10 frames. And again, I did my tick, 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 tick. And I came up with this photo where you can actually see her face, and you can see the 12 Apostles, or 3 or 4 of them, or 4.5. And the plastic was sort of in the right spot. It was flapping around her head. And I just asked her to, oh, can you just stop for like 2 seconds? And I was just fingers crossed and hoping for the best. And I came away with this image that won a few awards as well. And you can't
did well in head on,
up
was
in the
it,
morning.
Dex?
Sorry?
Was that head on that it did well in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the mobile category. So I came away with something really special on a day where I thought like, well, photography wise, this is not going to be a good day, but yeah, I can remember this moment very well. Very lucky to be able to capture this. So that's another decisive moment. Another one that, again, last January, where the same day where I shot that other image of the rain, where finally Sydney came out and could actually breathe again after the bushfires and the smoke. And I knew that there was going to be puddles because it rained, and I walked across the bridge and there was this huge puddle, and I was so happy that this girl with a beautiful dress walked past. So that's one of those things that you're just lucky with somebody walking past to make this image a little bit more special than just a reflection.
That's beautiful.
This is another sort of award-winning image, and it's been published as well. And again, one of those moments, it sort of happens, but I've got my feelers out. So I knew when I arrived at the Everleigh farmers markets that I love the locations, and if it's wet and if there's a puddle, you get these beautiful reflections of the warehouses in the water. And I saw kids playing and jumping across the rails and the water. And I was like, oh, that's going to be an awesome reflection. And again, the kids were very well behaved, and they just waited for me to take the photo, and they looked at me like, what's he doing? But I was like, no, please keep on jumping, because I saw the potential in this image. And again, it was really quick, like in a couple of seconds, I took a few frames and I looked at my photos. I was like, oh, I was so happy that the guy was jumping, and I got his perfect reflections and the reflection of the of the buildings, and I quickly showed the my photo to the guy and his parents as well. His parents were there, so I asked, I showed them the image and asked for permission if I was able to post this on social media, and they said, "Oh yeah, go ahead." And I quickly sent them the image, and the image is now framed and it's hanging in their lounge room. And the guy was so happy that when this image was published in the Australian photography magazine, he took the magazine to school and did a show and tell about his photo. So that's something really special that can happen on a very unassuming morning. The weather was a dark morning, but I came away with an awesome image, and yeah, I'm very happy with the shot. But yeah, and you can't think of
How big have you printed your images text from phone?
how big.
Yeah.
I can print them 50 by 50 centimeters, as in square. Then the quality is still reasonably okay. And because I use a grainy sort of filter, again, I get away with the imperfections, but it's the look I like, and it's still quality is still okay.
And do you? We just had a question too. Do you ever go to the level of getting any sort of forms to be signed, or are you sort of more word, just take the word of people and it's all good sort of thing?
Yeah, in this instance, I knew that the boy was there with his parents, so I asked the parents, and they were looking at me, what's he doing? So I just showed them what I did and asked them permission if it was okay to post this image on social media, and they were very happy with the image, and it's now hanging in the lounge room as well. So, but if it's people walking past, or if they're silhouettes or just black blurbs, then I don't ask permission. With the lady that was in the pool, I asked, and yeah, sometimes you just have to ask if you're okay, if they're okay with being taken.
I guess it comes down to if the person's identifiable to a certain degree.
Yeah. So this is what Paul asked me to include in my presentation as well.
Personal request.
Yeah, these are my architectural abstracts.
Oh, I love it.
It has nothing to do with iPhone photography or anything like that. It's just my personal project. I just love creating these. I just go through the archives when I have a bit of spare time, or when I want to create these, and often parts of images of architecture when I see the potential of them, I try to duplicate the image and rotate the image and put them together to create something abstract, something just because I can. That's the creative person in me that loves creating these architectural abstracts. So when you look at a quarter of this image, you can see it's the sails of the opera house, and it's copied and flipped, and then again vertically flipped, and you can create some awesome art. Basically it's art, and it's just something I love to create. This is another one of those. And this is when you look at 1/4 of the image, it's when you look up at World Square, and yeah, it becomes this crazy sort of out of this world sort of space architecture abstract thing. I love creating those. This is inside the Grace Hotel, one of the light features. This is 2 images on top of each other and I use opacity. I just love the lines and the curves and the patterns, and I create them just because I can, because I enjoy creating them.
Is that tower on Martin Place?
Yeah. This is inside the ANZ foyer in the city, where I've used one image and I rotated it, gave it opacity, and I rotated again and gave it opacity. So I use Photoshop Obviously I have to use it in my work as well, but this is just to create something different or special or abstract. That's when I really enjoy using Photoshop. And there's so many imperfections, but that's part of the image. I don't care. This is part of a building in Japan that I've deconstructed to create this architectural abstract. Some of the images were taken with an iPhone, some of them with a digital camera. So that was all my imagery. I'll now show you a few photographers that I admire, that inspire me. This is Art Klein. He is a Dutch photographer, and he took a lot of pictures of this big project in Holland that was called the Deltawerken. We had a big flooding in 1953, and well, the official name of Holland is the Netherlands, and that's because half of the country is below sea level. So we have to protect our country with dikes. Half the rivers that originate in the Alps sort of flow into a river delta, and that's where Holland is, the Netherlands. And to protect the country from the next flood, there was this big engineering project, and he took pictures while they were building the Deltawerken. So I loved his very graphic style. It's very black, very white. There's not a lot of gray. So I loved his work. This is one of my favorite pastimes in winter that I had to say goodbye to, like skating on all the canals. Again, high contrast silhouettes, love his work. And he did a lot of his photography in the 50s and 60s. So as a student, I was like, interesting. And you can still see it in my work that I've been influenced by his work.
Very much, yes.
Ansel Adams, no introduction needed. Beautiful purist photographer from America. Great textures, lines. I've also added the website if you want to have a look at his work. One of my all-time favorite images of here in Sydney, taken a while ago by Max Dupin. I've got a few of his books, beautiful black and white photography. They almost look like paintings. This is inside the Opera House. I love a bit of brutal architecture. And again, this little worker adds a sense of scale, and I use that in my photography as well. That's Max Dupin. Michael Kenner. I think there's a lot of fans all over the world of his work. Very poetic, beautiful imagery. He's had lots of exhibitions all over the world. Love his work. I grew up in the 80s when I was a teenager, and I was listening to The Cure and Depeche Mode and U2. And Anton Corbin, he is a Dutch photographer and film director and music video director. He shot a lot of album covers, and love his work. Very grainy, very, very high contrast. Love his work. He's got some iconic images. Clint Eastwood here. That's Anton Corbin. Joel Chinchilla, he is a master of long exposures and black and white fine art. And if you are looking for some tutorials and things to read, he's an educator and author as well. So visit bwvision.com, and there is a beautiful mono world for you to marvel at. He is one of my favorites. That's one of the bridges that Art Klein actually took a photo of when it was built in Holland. Joel Chinchilla. Alan Schaller, he is from the UK. This is one of those images like, oh my God, the light is beautiful. The silhouettes are in the right spot. There's a lot of dark, there's a lot of black. A lot of people are afraid of a lot of white or a lot of black, but it just works in this awesome image by Alan Schaller. He's a street photographer, and he, yeah, I love his work. It's very graphic. You see all the lines and all the the little silhouettes and how he has worked with the beautiful gray tiles and texture against the bright white and the really dark black. It makes my mono heart beat just a little bit faster. It is just fantastic. This is a contemporary photographer. I think he's more an artist than a photographer. He is Marcus Anderson. He's a street photographer. Like I said, artist, more of an artist here in Sydney. Love his work. Beautiful. He knows exactly where he needs to be to actually capture a person bathing in the sunlight with all that black darkness and shadow behind her and the architecture in the background. It's a beautiful image. Henki Kunchoro, he's from Indonesia. Love his image as well. Very poetic, very musical. He's a freelance editor for nature documentaries and corporate profiles, and he's a videographer as well. And he has taken one of the images, one of the most beautiful images I have ever seen, of just the waves breaking at the beach and the lights on the horizon. This is one of the most beautiful images I know. The essence of black and white, capturing light, and he has done that brilliantly in this masterpiece. Love it. So thank you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for having me. And if you want to contact me, I'm on Instagram at Monochrome Visions, and my website is monochromevisions.net. So if you want to know more, contact me or ask questions.
Yeah, and also it's worth mentioning that Dex is obviously a graphic designer in his I guess day job, but he also does design some amazing photography logos and things like that. So if you're ever looking at getting any of that work done, I know quite a lot of photographers, including myself, that have had their logos designed by him. So it's also something that is worth considering. Yeah, so thanks so much for joining us, Dex, and
you're welcome.
And we'll back to my big mug.
Yeah.
So
I'll add a bit more to that. So Dex has also designed pretty much everything the Light Collector's ever done, including all of our books, incredibly well. So his sense of structuring and pulling together sort of all the different sort of elements that you feel like you can do yourself, but there's a lot of times it's really worth leaning on someone with an understanding of flow and pairing and pulling things together and narrative and using the right text and structuring to support the kind of content and style you're going for. It's very subtle, but it's also a very refined skill, which Dex is super good at. Dex, do you want to talk about just quickly the books you've created so far and what you're thinking of creating? Because a lot of people wouldn't have thought about the fact that they can actually physically create publishable books from iPhone photographs, which I personally think is very inspiring. Because more than any other system in the world, the phone is the most popular camera on the planet, and people just tend to think it's a bit limited what you can do with it. But you've sort of proven that it's not.
Yeah, you can take a picture with any camera. I always tell people you can take a really good image with a $5 million camera, but you can at the same time take a really bad one as well. So, and you can take a really good image with an iPhone image and a really bad image. So it doesn't really matter. It's about what you capture. And obviously I'm limited in, I can't print all my images all that big, but in book form, I always encourage people to do a book project, look at your photography, look at what you've done, pick a subject and edit your images and show it to people so they can comment on where you are as a photographer and take stock and have a beautiful memento of a project or your life on your coffee table that you can show and share with people, and it's there for eternity as well. So I love creating books, and for example, the Light Collective in my work as a graphic designer, I design logos and books, and sometimes I design reports with medical equipment that I don't have any affinity with, but obviously with the awesome work of the Light Collective, it is such a pleasure to work with the photographer and make the images the hero in the books. So I often treat photography as the hero in my designs, and I design around them, and there's not a lot of bells and whistles. So my design is very minimal to make the images shine. So yeah, I love creating those books, and I encourage everyone to have a look at creating books and maybe start a project, and in the end, maybe publish it.
Well, I have to say, Dex, like if I didn't know whose that work was, and I was just going through the show, what you showed us, I would have easily considered that any of that work could have been shot in the last 100 years by, you know, some of the greatest film photographers in modern time. Like there's something so iconic and memorable and classic and beyond the technical, you know, which is what you've really inspired, I think, a lot of the people today in the audience that, you know, as you're developing your photography, we get a bit caught up with our equipment and our technique, and that is a part of learning a craft, you know, because once you've learned the craft, you can then move beyond it and purely lean on the creative side, but that takes a lot of time. So you sort of cut the wheat from the chaff there, I think, and just gone straight to a form of medium that just allows the purity of your creative expression and timing and vision just come through without the clutter of the technical. And it's sort of, you know, I really resisted phone photography myself for a long time. I thought it was just rubbish, and I never want my pictures to be seen on screens this big, and the world's changed, and I've had to bite my tongue and start joining the race, because that is actually the main place that people for the foreseeable future will be engaging with the imagery of the world.
Yeah, but it will get back to normal. I believe that it will get back to normal, and that we see beautiful work by you, Luke Sharkey, and by you, Paul, on gallery walls and printed one by 1 or 2 by 2 meters, and see all the beautiful detail that I can't do. So there's two ways at looking at it. I'm very limited in what I can do, but I can, even though I'm limited, I can make the most of it, and it will work.
And I really think technically, from maybe the resolution perspective, that's going to change as well. I think, you know, as they're cramming more and more pixels in those little sensors these days, and so I think it's only you know, not very long before you'll have a tool in your hands that will be able to give you everything that you've been looking for, including that resolution, which is pretty cool. And I do love the way that you've kind of pared things back, and so you've not only simplified things in terms of you know, making things black and white, but then you've also simplified it in terms of that technical aspect as well. And so in the end, all you're doing is really just looking for composition and tone and shadow, and it's extremely pure if you think about how you're approaching your work there. And so I think that's also a bit of a lesson. And I think I've saw a comment or two saying that you know, your work is almost a lesson in simplicity, which is you know, quite humbling, I suppose, to see. So so that's fantastic.
I do feel that I repeat myself a little bit, but I think that's every creative person starts to doubt themselves and wants to do things differently. And I've sort of started to shoot in a different format now lately. Obviously, during the Corona pandemic, and when we were all self-isolating, I wasn't able to take photos, and I took the opportunity to take stock myself and create a book. And I'm going to publish a book like at the end of the year, but I've now decided that I want to do something new, and I've started to take photos in a different format, like the 16:9 format, and post images in a series of 3. So I'm now sort of steering away from the square, and I want to do a few different things as well, maybe portraits, to challenge myself for the next project. And I'll always do my architectural abstracts in the
Yes,
background,
please.
but I think in black and white, I'm trying to find a new way of documenting my life or a different approach to photography. I think I talked to you, Luke, about infra-red maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where I already thought like I want to do different things. But I think finally, the last couple of months, when I've started to come out of hibernation and roam the streets of Sydney again, I think I've found sort of a new project. So see how that goes.
Oh, so there's not going to be an infrared converted iPhone down the track?
Maybe, yeah. There's probably an app for that at the moment.
Yeah,
But,
it probably is too. Yeah.
Well,
Oh,
Luke was
fantastic.
onto something. You know, there are some incredibly capable phone cameras out there now that are doing 40 megapixel RAW and incredible HDR capacity, and
Astro photography, you name it.
even
these days.
Astro. So it's really becoming more and more legitimate a form of image making, and the level of creativity that used to be quite limited with them is falling away, with the ability to do, you know, night scenes and long exposures and multiple exposures and you know, it's sort of I'm biting my tongue more and more and more about the phone business, and also the capacity to do high definition video with them as well at the same time. They're phenomenal, and I personally sort of feel the lack of invasiveness is a real advantage for a lot of the kind of photography you're doing in particular, Dex. I think it's difficult to have the confidence to move into that sort of genre of work where you're so exposed to people and capturing so many people if you don't have a certain way. And that's something I've admired about the great street photographers of the past. Some of them have done it by just having a camera around the neck and actually shooting from the hip, so they don't actually look like they're looking through the camera. And there's different ways around that, but just because it just blends so beautifully into, you know, the world we're already in, it doesn't stand out as something invasive. It's something just so common now, and in that regard, I feel like it's quite an advantage.
Fantastic.
Dex, you're an absolute inspiration, my friend.
Thank you. So are you guys. And there's a lot of people I could put in my inspiration sort of section in my presentation. So I'm already keen to go out tomorrow.
Fantastic.
And who's got the guts to follow on from Dex? Who wants to go first? You or me, Luke?
Well, I mean, I can talk a little bit about infrared if you like.
Yeah, please.
We did sort of mention about that. And so I guess that's a bit of a part of my journey in black and white. And I was inspired by, I don't think you ended up having any Andy Lee in your influences, did you, Dex?
No, I had to cull. I had like 20 or 30 names, but it's not all about me.
Oh, no, that's all right. Well, there's a photographer called Andy Lee, and I think both Dex and I were very inspired by his work. I believe, speaking with Ricardo as well, he's quite inspired by Andy Lee's work. So I suggest you look him up on Instagram, perhaps, to see some of his images. But he did a series of infrared black and white images in Iceland. And when Dex and I both went over to Iceland, I actually took a infrared converted 5D Mark II with me, and sort of tried to sort of played with it myself and tried a few different things. And so, and that's kind of what started me on my infrared journey. But what I might do is just show a few images just to explain infrared and why it's something that's worth looking at. So I'll just share this screen here. And I'll open up. I've lost that folder now, haven't I? Here we go. So this is an infrared image here. If I make it full screen. And so what tends to happen in infrared is you get these very anything that's kind of very green tends to, from a foliage perspective, tends to go quite white. And so in this image here, it kind of does a bit what Dex likes in terms of create a more high contrast scene. And so it might be easier to describe that by actually showing you a photograph that was taken only a few minutes apart from that. And that's this one here. So this is actually the same scene, but not in infrared. And you can really see how it's changed the contrast. You can see that there's a little bit of a small touch of light here, but you know, the real, even though there's, what am I trying to say? The light has just been emphasized so much more in the infrared. What is this essentially the same thing there? So that gives you a bit of an idea. This is also another infrared image here of the same location. And basically what I've done is I've just left the camera on the tripod and switched, well, I left the tripod in the same position and changed out so that my infrared camera was replaced with my color camera. And so that's actually what the scene looked like in visible color, I guess you could say. And actually there was a lot of bushfire smoke here at the time. And so by infrared actually can see through some of that sort of, I guess, particulate atmospheric contamination, I guess, if you put it that way. And so, yeah, it's really cleared the scene up and really provided a lot more contrast. And obviously, I like the way that these Pandani plants, Tasmanian native plant, sort of has that look in black and white, or it really pops that whiter color. And so you get a nice color contrast between that and this. Whereas in this case, there's not as great a contrast, certainly between those two colors there. So that's quite interesting how it can really dramatically alter how the world can be seen. And the other thing I loved about this was that you know, I'm not aware if anyone's actually photographed this particular location in infrared before. There's still quite a lot of images out there of you know, of this location, but I guess when you take an infrared camera out into the wilderness, you're really maybe documenting it literally in a different light. For potentially the first time. So that's always quite exciting as well. So that's definitely one aspect that I really enjoyed about infrared. And so to create an infrared camera, you actually need to send it away. Well, there's multiple ways you can do it, but generally you send the camera away and they'll actually take out a filter on the front of the sensor and replace it with a different one. And so actually cameras can see full spectrum, but what happens when they're manufactured is they actually put filters in that block the UV and infrared light. And so you're only really going to capture the visible light in the picture. And they do that because if it captured all light, all the full spectrum, then you'd have weird sort of red casts and things like that. So that's why it's like that. But what they actually do instead is they remove that infrared UV filter and actually put a filter in that blocks the visible light. And so it's only letting in infrared light. So it's almost inverting what that filter did. And so you then, but then the downside to it is that camera now can only shoot in infrared. So you kind of want to do that to a camera that you don't typically need to use all the time, because you know, some people like Dex love shooting in black and white, but for me personally, you know, I do too, but not all the time. I'm not dedicated in that way. So I'm just going to just show you my infrared camera. So this is it here. So it's just an A7R Mark I actually. And if I show you the actual sensor on the front there, it looks a little different to what it normally would look like. And that's because it's got that infrared sensor, or infrared filter rather, on the front of the actual sensor there. And so otherwise it pretty much behaves like a normal camera would. But yeah, only shooting in that infrared color. And yeah, so I guess that, I don't know if that explains it well, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask. That I just saw a question, how much to convert. It really depends on where you get it done. But generally you're looking at around about the $500 mark. So it's not terribly cheap, but if you want to be able to get that look in camera kind of effortlessly, then that's the way to go. There's definitely cheaper ways. So for example, you can get a filter that you can screw onto the front of your lens, and that filter will also have the same capability of blocking the visible color and only letting the infrared light in. But don't forget that your camera actually still has that infrared blocking filter over the sensor. So what will happen is that your exposure time will become extremely long, because I guess the light has to still pass through that infrared blocking filter in front of your sensor. And so that's why you might have, 30-second exposures to 1 minute just from putting this infrared filter on, and you really can't change that. And so so it's definitely one way of doing it, but unless you want to do very long exposures for all of your infrared photos, it's not really going to cut through it in the end of the day. And certainly I really value being able to hand hold my camera for taking these infrared captures. For example, one of my probably most awarded shots, and I think I've discussed this in our photo competition episode, so apologies if you've already heard me talk about this particular image. If I can actually find it, here it is. When it loads, yeah, Barossa Bolt. So there's no way I could have captured an image like this if I had a 30-second filter in front of a screw-on infrared filter to capture this image. So that's the big advantage of a conversion. There's two probably main ways, conversion bands, I suppose you could say, or bandwidths. So 720 nanometers and 830 or 850 nanometers. And so that's the 720 nanometers actually lets in a little bit of visible light. And so a 720 nanometer conversion might look more like this, where this you can see that there's a little bit of false color here. And there's some anti-crepuscular rays going through as well, if you can faintly see that. But this is actually in Canada. But I've done a bit of channel swapping, and so I've made the sky back to being blue again. But you can really see, that's the kind of look you can get with that 720 nanometer. And this is another example here, taken in Narrabeen at the boardwalk there in a lightning storm. And you can see that we've got, a little bit of color here that I can bring out in the image. So it's not technically a straight monochrome image, but sometimes I find that actually kind of lifts the shot a little bit, having that. So, and you can also alter the colors too. So in this one, I've made them a bit more blue, just for something a bit different. Here's another one here where I've got a bit of false color coming through here. Sort of, I don't know, I don't really like the toning, and that maybe the blues in the sepia here doesn't really work. Another example might be this tree here in the field, which is an infrared image. And then this one I've just added, that's actually the original sort of red color that came through from the actual original exposure that I've left in there, whereas that's more of a straight monochrome conversion. So that sort of gives you a bit of an idea of what you can do with a 720 nanometer conversion, where you do have a little bit of that visible light coming through. But for me personally, I was never really a massive fan of having that false color, and it just sort of made it look a little bit weird almost. It can, I think Andy Lee used it a bit, didn't he, Dex, in terms of having a bit of false color there. And I mean, it maybe in this sort of setting it works okay, but yeah, that's definitely something that you can play with. And so if you go with an 830 or 850 nanometer conversion, then what's happening is you really are getting a straight black and white image, and more of a high contrast kind of look out of it. I've actually converted.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Don't you feel like you could possibly get completely lost in all the possibilities in Photoshop? So you have to have a really good sort of clear vision of what you want to achieve in your photography, because the opportunities, it's just endless, and that's something that scares me. And that's why I sort of steer away from the technical and Photoshop aspect. But how does that work for you? Is it sort of, you feel, oh, I can enhance my image, or do you feel like, oh, the sky's the limit, but yeah, what to do? There's too much possible.
Yeah, well, I think in some ways, I mean, I'm not what a very experimental photographer, maybe less so these days. I guess a few years ago I was open to trying different things and different techniques, and maybe saw it more as an art form, and now I see it a bit more from a commercial perspective perhaps. So that's maybe been beaten out of me by going professional, which is one of the fun things that can happen. It's one reason why in some ways I haven't shot as much infrared lately as I had in the past, and that's mainly because, you know, there is so much you can do with it. And I guess, and one reason why I did the conversion in a way, because then I didn't have the distraction of the color from the 720 nanometer as well, which I think I was struggling with, because I had it there and I was tempted to play with it, but at the same time, all I really wanted to do was black and white. So I think that was a bit of a move of why I actually converted my camera originally to 720, and then I sent it back again and did a second conversion to convert it to 830, 850, I think it is actually. And realistically, it was a bit of a silly move to do that, because you can just convert your 720 to black and white, like in post, but I really wanted to see how much more contrast I could get out of those frames and get as much of it in camera as I can. And I must also say that there's another way that you can do it, where you can actually get a full spectrum conversion. So all they do is they just take out that UV and IR blocking filter in front of the sensor, and they don't replace it with any other sensor. They just put essentially a piece of glass in there. And that apparently Camera Clinic in Melbourne can actually do that. I think it's about $400 to $500 there too. And what you can then do is then use a filter in front of the lens, or you can even get clip-in filters that go over the sensor. But the difference is that because you don't have the IR blocking filter over the sensor anymore, more light will hit the sensor, and so you won't have that sort of 30-second exposure problem that you would have otherwise. So the exposure time will be a lot faster. And so that way you could have a full spectrum camera and clip in a 720 nanometer filter and pull that out, and then clip in an 830 nanometer filter and use that one. And you can even have filters that cover block multiple bands, and that's commonly used in astrophotography, where you have other wavelengths of light that you really need to focus on. And so that's definitely, probably if I was going to do it all again, I would look at probably doing it that way, getting a full spectrum conversion, and then basically choosing the filters that I put over. And then I could even shoot in UV if I wanted to, which can look quite interesting as well. So, so food for thought, and probably is something I'll do one day, because full spectrum conversion is a good thing to do from an astrophotography perspective. And then I can also clip on and shoot in infrared when I want to as well. So it's a very adaptable solution that way. So it's something to think about. Yeah, and I guess with the infrared, it's just really nice to have leading lines. You find that you get that much more contrast between the blacks and the whites, and so it's it really does sort of amplify how things look. This is another one from Iceland as well, with the sort of like tentacles of the sand ridges going towards the towards Vitsaka, Troll Sea Stack. And then, yeah, I really enjoyed shooting in Iceland, the roads there, and this very Andy Lee inspired. If you see his work, he's got a lot of amazing shots of roads in Iceland with mountains in the distance, and it's an amazing country to photograph. And I think in the end, Dex, I probably took more infrared photos in Iceland than I did visible color photos in the end. So it was interesting how that panned out. And I have done some infrared shooting in Australia as well. So this is Cradle Mountain at Kathleen's Pool, and I really love the way that the light bounced off the ripples in the foreground, and then the classic sort of scene here, and you can see how it really renders the water almost black And one other feature that really pops with infrared is the cloud. And so the blue skies get rendered black, and then the clouds can get rendered brilliantly white. And so you can get, you know, amazing sort of look with that. Here's another view of that particular scene here, where you've got, yeah, maybe less blue sky there, but some nice color bouncing off these rocks here as well. This is one I took in Greece, and that's at one of the towers in Mykonos, one of the old villages there. And you can really see how it's brought out the detail on this high cirrus cloud behind that tower. And so it sort of, it wouldn't have anywhere near that kind of impact if it was a direct conversion. Because that's one question I get is, you know, surely you could just shoot in color like a standard frame and then convert it to black and white and sort of tweak the colors and kind of make it into an infrared shot. And to a certain degree, you can get close, but realistically, or for me, I kind of like the fact that that's what came out of the camera. And so that's what I saw when I shot it. And so maybe you can get pretty close to it in post, but I think, you know, that's not really what I'm shooting infrared for. I like the fact that I can say I'm photographing in a different light. And, you know, you're almost shooting things you can't see because the human eye can't really see those spectrums of light. So, you know, from a storytelling perspective, it's also a nice thing to have. I shot this one with Dex actually, when he gave me a tour around Amsterdam. And so you can see again how it's really pulled out the detail in the clouds above, and any light patches, any bright areas will really be accentuated very strongly in infrared. I also did a series of shots of churches in Iceland as well, and I really liked how this cloud sort of looks like it's coming out of the steeple of the church there in Budia. Probably didn't pronounce that right, but yeah. So, and yeah, I'll leave it on some more of the Australian landscape. But I took the infrared camera on the overland track, which is a bit of a commitment. I didn't really take many photographs in infrared. I was actually on a job. So, you know, the problem is that no one really hires you to shoot things in black and white. Or not generally if you're a landscape photographer doing a commercial job related to tourism, because a black and white shot just generally doesn't sell anything in terms of tourism. People, unless, I mean, I've seen some campaigns where they've tried a bit of black and white here and there to maybe look a bit classy or something like that, but it's generally one of those things. And maybe one reason why I've pulled back a bit from shooting in black and white, because it's not very adaptable. If once you've shot an infrared frame, it's black and white forever. And if they come back to you and say, "Oh, have you got any shots of this scene?" And you know, a black and white photograph's just not going to do. So I've kind of resigned myself to the fact that maybe it's better to shoot things in color and do a conversion. And maybe I don't quite get those amazing tones that I get from infrared, but at least it's going to be something that I can use down the track either way. So that's been a massive consideration for me. The good thing about having a small camera like this is that it's not a huge amount to carry in your pack. If you're going on a hike or anything like that, it probably weighs about 400 or 500 grams. So it's not a massive thing to carry around, but it is very distracting because you know the scene will work really well in infrared, but then, and so you want to shoot in infrared, and then you see how well it's working in infrared, and you just want to shoot more and more. And in the end, you actually don't capture anything in color at all. You've got it all in infrared, and it looks great, but then you have that kind of balancing act of not getting swept up in it. And so that's where sometimes maybe the commercial realities play off against more passions or your creative aspect. So it's one of the unfortunate facts of the way things go. I don't all shoot, like I mentioned, don't always shoot. I think actually, you know, this one's another infrared frame as well, from Crescent Head. So I was really keen to see how the sea cave there came up. infrared, and it, you know, again, the light coming off of these rocks in the foreground really worked really well. Yeah. So someone just asked if I'd do any Astro in black and white, and I have tried. I don't have the frame with me, but I have actually tried to shoot the Milky Way in infrared, and it doesn't really look anywhere near as spectacular as it does in I guess the visible color spectrum. I'd have converted one or two shots to, oops, that's the wrong folder. I have converted one or two shots to Astro shots to black and white. It can look interesting, but yeah, it's something I've tried to keep separate, I suppose, when it comes to that. It's just not a thought process that really enters my mind. But yeah, I've probably spoken enough about my work there and some of the infrared work that I've done. I don't know if any other questions have come up around infrared. Do I tend to use any lens, or do I have a favorite for infrared? Thanks, Rosie. In terms of lenses, it's a really important thing to note actually with infrared conversions that lenses are designed to perform in visible light. And there's not many lenses out there where they've actually tuned the lens to also perform in infrared, because there's an infinitesimally small amount of people that are actually shooting in infrared. And so I found in particular, unfortunately, that Sony's lenses don't perform as well as infrared as particularly Canon lenses do. There's certain lenses that are just almost flawless in infrared. One I can think of is the Canon 16-35 f4L is a brilliant lens in infrared. And what actually happens is if the lens isn't tuned to be, if the lens doesn't perform well in infrared, you get what's called a hotspot. And basically in the center of frame, it's like a really sort of soft, low contrast blob in the center of frame. And you can kind of remove it by actually opening up the aperture. That kind of softens that blob, but it's kind of always there. And it's really a function of the lens. You can't do anything about it. So certain lenses you find will perform much better than others. And so in terms of, I would say the 16-35 was probably my favorite. The Canon lens was my favorite infrared lens, and I kept it for a long time actually. Even when I'd almost done a full Sony conversion, I was actually shooting on that lens as a priority, just because if I switched to the infrared, I was still shooting on a lens that could perform well. Nowadays, I haven't really tested all of my lenses now that some of the newer ones I've got to see. So it's something, there's actually websites you can go to and they'll actually talk about the performance of the lenses with the hotspots. And they've actually got a whole list there that you can look at and see how your lenses will perform in infrared. So you can even get a bit of an idea on if you might need to buy a new lens if you're looking at doing an infrared conversion or not as well. So that's something worth looking at. Robin Aldridge just mentioned that Kalari Vision in the States have one of those lists. I don't know the other big, so there's Kalari and then there's also another one called LifePixel as well. They're probably the two major companies in the US. I've actually got my first conversion done with, actually first two conversions done with LifePixel, and then my last conversion was with Kalari, and their customer service is pretty much the same. So it's, I think one's based on the East Coast, one's based on the West Coast of the US. It costs a lot of money to send it over there, but I'd actually look at Camera Clinic in Melbourne as well. I think, that's worth looking at. I think at the time they told me that they were only going to use a plastic filter, whereas LifePixel told me it was a glass filter, and I just felt more comfortable with that. But that's just something worth thinking about when it comes to doing that. So I think that's probably all from me, unless if there's any more questions about that. But I've also got a blog on my website where I talk a bit about infrared conversion. It's adapted from an article I wrote for Australian Photography magazine, and it's a bit of an intro into infrared photography and what's involved with that. But I'm also very happy to answer any questions that any of the viewers have. If you just shoot me an email, I'm more than happy to help with that. And also, this camera is actually for sale as well. So if you're looking at getting into infrared and want a 850 nanometer converted A7R, then you know who to talk to. So might as well put a plug in there where I can.
Come on, Loki.
Yeah. So awesome. All right. Well, I might even just throw it over to Paul. I believe Paul's got some of his black and white work to show, and maybe some of his inspirations in the black and white area as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think sort of before we do, and partly in terms of why, is we haven't sort of talked so much about black and white conversion traditionally, or how to encourage or support people to start thinking in black and white and seeing in black and white. And I think one of the simplest ways that I personally found was just squint really hard. It sounds stupid and so basic, but at the same time, straight away, it reduces what you're seeing, it limits the color. It really accentuates where the light is and where it isn't in a frame, and it starts reducing what you see in front of you to some of the more simplistic elements and structural elements, which I think is quite important. I know when I import my images into Lightroom, having shot them mainly in color, there's a very, very simple keystroke, which is just the letter V, and it's an instant black and white conversion. And it's just sort of middle of the road, sort of down the line. It's not necessarily, the perfect conversion, but it's a very, very quick way to start getting a sense of which your images are going to suit. And there's an immediate kind of sense of knowing to some extent if they will or won't. And I think that's kind of a good practice to start, because you might look, if you practice, looking along a whole line of color images and thinking, which one to convert, actually then go through them and convert them quickly. And you can press the V and it goes straight back to colors. You're not changing anything. And it will start just flicking your mind over into thinking a different way. The other thing that I find you can do in Canons and some cameras is you can actually change the back of your screen to give you a black and white preview of the photograph you've taken. So that's another very, very fast forward technique out in the field, where you can start getting more of a feel for shifting your mindset towards black and white, because it does take a little while. Even 25 years down the track, I'm still looking at a scene going, oh, I think that's going to be good black and white. And generally I find high contrast scenes are probably the most likely ones to convert that way, but it takes a while to sort of wrap your head around how colors translate. I mean, reds and greens I alluded to earlier, that have such a strong dynamic sort of impact in an image in terms of their separation and their complement. And they're a very clear example that when you convert to black and white, they both revert to just muted gray and there's no separation almost at all. So it's one of those elements where it's not just completely simple to wrap your head around it. Personally, when I'm really serious about using black and white, I'll often use Nik Effects Silver Effects Pro. And I do find that has quite a good amount to play with in terms of experimenting with the different sort of tonal ranges. And
I use the same actually as well, Paul.
Yeah, I had a very...
feel like you can't push it too far though, because the files can get a bit crunchy if you push things too far. Maybe that's what you're after as well.
If you start playing with the structure element of it, it's quite destructive. And it can pull apart your files really quickly and give you a pretty of a gritty kind of feel. But so here's this whole set, I think, in front of me now. I've all been Nik Effects. I did probably about 2 years where I was particularly moved towards a sepia tonality, and that sort of pervaded through a lot of my work for a while. I probably moved back to a little bit more to traditional black and white. But this is an image just shot just down the road from my house. Yeah, I was very happy when the first judge at APA brought it up as 98. I was like, thanks, buddy. And it was the kind of image that instantly there wasn't a lot of color present anyway, and it had a lot of contrast, it had a lot of shape, it had converging lines, it had a lot of symbolism, and it just worked beautifully in terms of that sort of conversion. And again, I sort of felt like that hint of warmth. I wanted a hint of warmth rather than just a cold kind of feel to it, because it has a bit of a spiritual context. I should call it Ascension, and it's a bit about, it's at a cenotaph, which is a memorabilia for, you know, the men and women that have passed on for and given their lives for our freedom. And the light structure was actually part of Dark Mofo, was to me very symbolic of their ascension of their souls to the world beyond. And so it took a while to get myself in a position to get the kind of structure I wanted to the image, but I got there in the end. This was part of a series of fine art nudes that I was pretty lucky. I got represented pretty early by Philip Culper from Source Photographica in Melbourne. And right at the beginning, when I started, I just did a portfolio review at the Biennale, which I recommend doing actually. And he spotted some of my work, and I showed him all my landscapes, and I had one nude in there, and he just said, he went through all my landscapes and just whipped them through like they were nothing. And then he pulled out one of the nudes and said, "Have you got more of these?" And I just went, yes, even though I kind of didn't. And I didn't tell him and he said, "Do you want to be at an exhibition in October?" And I was like, yes. Didn't tell him I was leaving the next morning for a round the world trip for 2 months. I was just thought I'll figure that out. And I actually was with my partner, who's a great photographer herself, and at the time, and she and I took a series of images for this exhibition around the world. And this one was actually taken in Switzerland, at the Klein right at the top there. And I wasn't sure how much, some people call this a landscape rather than portrait and vice versa, which is something I find quite intriguing about it. But that was actually, funny enough, some of my first exposure to some of the greatest photographers in modern time, because unbeknownst to me, my images ended up on the wall next to Max Dupain and Patrick de Marchais and Lisa Tomasetti and Herb Ritz. And anyway, it was just like I went in there and just went, oh my God, that'll probably never happen again for my life. These are some canyon shots in not Antelope, actually. It was, I bumped into I made good friends with a local Indian photographer, and he steered me in a few sort of more hard to get to places. This is actually a moonscape. So it's a very long exposure of the moon kind of reflecting on the waterways and the full moon, just sort of mixed in with clouds. And again, it's not hard to recognize that it's not going to be a lot of color in there anyway, so why not sort of lean on it? But I like the golden kind of feel of it. This is an image I took up in Falls Creek, with the dappled light just moving through on a moody afternoon, and every second, what was highlighted sort of changed. And again, I'm leaning very much on simplicity and form, and not on color, so it works quite well, I think, that one. This was shot just around the corner at where did you have your night shot, Lukey, with the torch, the last one? Is it Mount Buller, Mount?
That was up on Mount Kosciuszko. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was thinking this is around the back of this one, but anyway, it's up in the Victorian Alps. Again, leaning on depth. It really needed the side light along here to give it sort of a pathway to walk through, and there's a bit of repetition in terms of shapes and highlights in the back. So you can walk through this image a long way, but I think that kind of tonality really suits the grittiness of the rocks. This was almost impossible to photograph during the day. This is in Venice, Venezia. And if you'd ever been to this place, and there's usually about 10,000 people around you, and you don't have a moment to yourself. So I actually came back at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, I'm going to get this shot. And there was thankfully no one there. Again, I'm leaning on the simplicity of repetition of form. And I've got a highlight down the end to pull you down the frame, but there's enough kind of highlights here to hold you in place and let you walk down a bit more slowly rather than being sort of jerked down. This was a shot I just took with a simple point and shoot camera walking around San Francisco. And this is one of the more famous buildings there, and it has one section on 4 sides that actually sticks out and is vertical, whereas the rest of it is triangular. So I was just playing around with that kind of angle. This is something I wanted to have look like one of those sort of older Japanese looking type images from a long time ago. And I've actually printed it on the Japanese paper, just to give it a more of an ageless kind of feel. And that was, again, definitely using Nik effects to good impact. This is downtown Hong Kong, I believe. I just raced out for a few hours from a through flight and got a few shots. I think this is called the Twin Towers, or they kind of look a bit like koalas to me. I think that might be the end of that folder. Let me just double check. Yeah, and then some more sort of traditional black and whites is some of my favorite places in the world, as Lukey well knows, and I actually went out with Luke and Dex together actually about a year ago or 2 years ago, Lukey, trying to remember.
Be
2
two, I
years
think.
ago.
Yep.
2 now, and introduced Dex to one of my favorite places on the planet. Well, and Lukey too. And this is out on the remote kind of southwest coastline of the Tarkine in the northwest Tasmania. So it's pretty out of the way and pretty remote, but it's actually surprisingly not that technically hard to get to at all. And that's one of the reasons why I keep going back to it. Again, same sort of area. I just felt like black and white color was just a bit of a distraction from the level of just decadent form that was just weaving through everything. And I wanted to create images that felt old and ageless and kind of lent hard on the gritty sort of structure of the geomorphology. This is just up the road a little bit further in Arthur River at the very northern tip of the Tarkine, a place called the Edge of the World. And again, I felt like with the drama of the scene and the sort of mood of the dark sort of skies, it sort of lent more strength to a black and white interpretation, I guess. I did have another color one, which was kind of had a bluish kind of feel, but I enjoyed the simplicity of this one a bit more. I've got a few here from a journey down the Grand Canyon, and the Grand Canyon is actually a very high contrast place to shoot because the walls are so reflective, and being there in winter, most of the light was there was no light that was consistent in the canyon. It was really bright on one side and really dark on the other, so it actually lent quite easily with that high contrast subject matter to black and whites. Here I've got one figure you can kind of see in the middle just moving back into it. So that was the kind of contrast range you're dealing with a lot of the time, just pure blacks and elements of white. So I felt like, why not lean on it? This was a beautiful morning, one of the rare times that the canyon sort of opened it up enough to sort of light up the canyon a little bit more. Because in most of the areas, it's almost 2 kilometers high, and it blocks a lot of that late light in particular. But again, simple, sometimes having a lower contrast image can have a different aesthetic and a different feel. It is also, the softest of it can be really appealing. I'm not always going for high contrast, so I tend to mix it up a little bit. If that one kind of works in that regard. And here I've moved into a little bit more of a high contrast kind of scene, a bit deeper into the canyon. Again, later sort of light, shadows upon shadows. And I think in this case, I'm a little bit lucky to have a sky that really complements it. That wouldn't feel as wholesome or as holistic, I think, without, some interest in the sky as well. This one was one of the most difficult images I've ever captured for a black and white film. It was, I think we were 5 rappels down so far off dodgy, half-rotten logs, and I fell into that water down below at the bottom, which was about 2 degrees centigrade. I was wearing and then I swam across to the end, and I slipped on some mud with my camera out of the dry bag and just about went under, and still managed to turn around and get this shot. And it was about ISO 4000 at 1/8 of a second by hand at 2.8. So it's about as hard as you're ever going to want to push an image by hand. And somehow you can't really tell. I got away with it. And that's my good friend Taylor Glenn up the top, who went down the Grand Canyon with. And this is in Zion National Park in a place called Pine Canyon, which is one of the great canyoneering adventures in Zion. Another great canyoneering, more accessible adventure to people is walking up the Virgin Narrows. In this case, it was midwinter. There's no one there. In summer, it's super, super popular. And that's just at the very start of it, literally just above my head in the car park.
Is that where they have to have a ballot system to be able to go through?
I don't think so much the Virgin Narrows. I think it's just one of the day walks in the park.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they've changed that. I think maybe because I was there in the heart of winter, it didn't come up as an issue. I'd be guessing in the summer they might have to, just because it's so prolific. But it's in winter you don't get too many people because the water's just like ice and it's up to your hips in some places walking through, and it's quite brutal. So I had a full sealed dry suit going up there as well, which was pretty helpful. This is not too far away in Bryce Canyon. Just I had this sort of luminous sort of glow to the way. It's actually backlit, but there was so much light bouncing around, it kind of lit things up in different directions, and you'll see a tiny hint of snow kind of mirroring in with the whites of the reflection in there as well, and a mixture of diagonals, and you know, it had some appeal being in color. It's a very quite bright orangey sort of glow, but it didn't give the wintry feel that I was sort of looking for with the fresh snow. This one was way out the back of a national park. Oh God, I forgot the name, but it's a big 4-wheel drive out the back. And these are very sacred to the Navajo people, I think, in terms of what they stand for. So the sun and the moon is what they call them. And you can't quite tell from the second one, but it actually stands alone in this huge, big open valley. And we got told not to go in there because there was a big storm coming. And sure enough, the storm hit and we barely made it out. This is also some canyons near Antelope, but not quite in this canyon for about an hour and actually shoot, you know, a little bit of focus stacking and sense. You know, he's very simplistic, minimalist photographer. He's British. He only shoots film. I had some big conversations with him about what he feels about the legitimacy of the digital platform as a fine art medium, and he just feels like it's almost impossible to give it the same reverence in a lot of ways because of just how easy it is to reproduce things. And so he stuck to film all the way through. He shoots a wide sort of range of genres and a lot of different sort of material, but there is a certain style that runs through his work that Luke and Dex could probably attest to. Yeah. And that elegant sort of minimalism is one of them. And he's not afraid to really push high contrast sort of work as well, which I really appreciate. This is a little bit pixelated, but at the same time, I love the atmospherics of it. You know, that he's chosen a lot of quite industrial subjects and created such incredible feeling and emotion within them is something I find sort of deeply appealing. You know, I can just spend hours with some of these images and just feel, you know, just leaning on the luminance of them and just the pure sort of shape. And I guess the symbolism of them as much as anything. So again, you know, beautifully simple, a lot of isolated features in this work, a lot of very simple, you know, there's just very, very simple elements that give other areas of the image a reason to be there, which are a subtle sort of complement to his work. You know, not afraid of big blocked open sort of areas with little detail in them just to support the detail that is in the image further away. Again, very, very simple scenes, but just so elegantly and it's seen in such a refined sort of way, which I super appreciate. Again, just the atmospherics, you know, of somewhere just so simple and so easy to pass by. You know, he creates an incredible kind of mood and feeling about them. Sorry, this is pixelated, but it's one of my favorites of his. Just almost like space-like, eerie, you know, monoliths that you know you could read into sort of all sorts of ways in terms of what they represent and what they feel like to you. Again, you know, there's a lot of timeless kind of characteristics to his work. I love a lot of the grain in there as well, and I know Dex really enjoys his work as well. So he's right up there for me. It's some of my great inspirations. It's hard to go past Mr. Adams. I think Dex might have chose better examples. I was in a bit of a rush, but having spent a lot of time in Yosemite myself, I've got a much greater appreciation for how deeply he understood that landscape and how much you know, he explored its many, many moods. I also enjoy a lot of the simplistic tree and foliage sort of work that he's done, where he's just leaned on the reflective capacities of foliage just so beautifully. He wasn't afraid to look at the grand and the small, which I really appreciate about Ansel's work in particular. Yeah, and his exploration of some of the small features, I think, is something that is sometimes a bit overlooked about his work, because a lot of his grander sort of broader landscapes are sort of more accessible to people. There is actually a gallery of his work in Yosemite as well, so you get a double treat, and that you can go into the gallery, get inspiration about where to shoot, and then go out there and shoot it yourself, which is quite a treat. You know, the sequoias and no, they're not sequoias. I'm trying to think. These are some of the oldest bristlecone pines. That's right. That you find in areas sort of around the Sierras. I just missed going up to one of the main areas last time I was over there because I got too carried away by shooting in Death Valley, but it wasn't too far away. But just, you know, he was just such an expert in tonality, and he created the zone system where, you know, he really allocated very specific quantifiable qualities to the way tone is used and explored and represented in an image. And I think it still works as a baseline to a lot of great black and white photographers work today, and probably all of us when we're learning.
Well, actually, if anyone uses the Tony Kuiper luminosity panel, there's actually a zone mask
That's right.
there where you can actually choose a particular zone as defined by that system and modify the light in that particular zone, which is quite useful. I actually use it quite often. So yeah, there's a very direct application there.
Yeah, Lucky was just showing me that the other day. I'm going to have a good look at that after. That's Zabriskie Point in Death Valley. And, it did get around a little bit more than people thought. This is actually ice. And I found this sort of by accident today, and I was just like, oh, it just really surprised me. Again, you get with some of these photographers that are older, you sort of get the best of the best, or certain bodies of work that get created together by other people that aren't necessarily them later in life or beyond their life, and more specifically. And they can miss or a lot of the sweep of the wider sort of vision that they have sometimes to some extent. But he was a bit of a master at the interrelationship and the visual kind of balance and interdynamics between all the different elements that were in his images. These to me are just almost caressing each other and in conversation with each other just through that juxtaposition, which could have easily been taken away by a very, very slight change in the vantage point. Again, I missed the Bridal Veil Falls. I was hoping to get it. Apparently it's pretty insane when it happens. I was actually in the States not too far away when it happened last time, but it's only a few days a year, I think, Lucky. Oh, you probably know. Where this Bridal Veil Falls actually just lights up on fire with a very
fire
specific
tail,
band.
or they give it a name, yeah.
Yeah, but it's very iconic. I mean, Yosemite is just such an iconic place in general. Another photographer I got exposed to, and it was actually partly through my representation with Source Photographica, was Nick Brandt. And Nick Brandt is probably more famous for his animal work in particular, but the context of the landscape that he takes them in is quite profound. And he shoots large format film. So I've seen these prints at 2.5, 3 meters square, and they're just absolutely divine. And he's one of those photographers that inspires me, not only for his work, but for the purpose behind his work, and that he's a deep-hearted conservationist, and pretty much every aspect of his work goes towards being the voice for the voiceless, particularly the animals in Africa, and that are just disappearing at absolutely alarming rates. And he's done some absolutely wonderful bodies of work sort of exploring that, and he's really stretching the boundaries of how he expresses that these days with his modern work, which I really recommend you go and have a look. But also, it was my first exposure to that sort of like off black and white kind of sepia tonality, and it's just something about it that I personally find just deeply appealing, a little bit more so often than just the coldness of pure sort of non-color black and whites. There's just a little bit of emotional warmth and an extra level of engagement, I feel, that comes through from that added sort of tonality. And I find myself just sneakily just adding a little bit more in, and I've got to be careful not to put too much in so it doesn't sort of take away from the structure of the image. But Nick Brandt, he's a British photographer, Brandt. Highly recommend looking up his work. And his books are just phenomenal. These are actually creatures that he found that were completely desiccated in salt. And he created this incredible sort of eerie, evocative body of work that caused a lot of controversy, actually. But I just find the simplicity and elegance and storytelling of them just really quite dramatic and really, really eerily sort of amazing. Yeah, very, very talented, passionate man. And the last bit of inspiration I have for black and white in particular is Sarah Marino, who's I think she's either Californian-based, but she's an American-based photographer. A wonderful lady, and she actually does a lot of educational work in black and white photography. And when I'm over in America, a lot of the photographers that I spend time with rave about her. And she has a very, again, beautifully elegant, simplistic sort of way, and she does wonderful work with sort of foliage as well. Spent a lot of time in the Four Corners sort of area, Death Valley sort of area, which I think is one of the most photogenic areas on the planet Earth. I could easily just spend years out there and just finding stuff almost every day to photograph. Death Valley is one area I'm particularly fond of. I haven't managed to catch it in a lightning storm. Although I have caught it after snow, and my last trip there, I actually photographed it from the air with a few days after a fresh snowfall, which was pretty epic. That looks like somewhere around Zabriskie Point as well, with the Badwater Basin behind it, I'd be guessing. But just beautiful, simple, elegant, and her understanding of tonality is absolutely divine. And I'm actually going to do, I actually even downloaded, I think one of her courses, I'm going to have a look at it. It was purely on her methodology around black and white conversion. I haven't looked at it yet. I was hoping to look at it before tonight to get some more ideas, but I'm pretty inspired to go have a look at it after. Again, you know, that mastery of tone is just absolutely blows me away in an image like this. Just every single element of the, you know, that toner range is included all the way through, and just gives it so much life and form. Yeah, super elegant, inspiring, quite delicious. Anyway, we've done ourselves proud and done a good long show as usual. And I'm a little bit flabbergasted by Dex, you know, having watched his work and been a friend of his for a long time. It still actually blew my socks off tonight, Dex, seeing just the caliber and depth of your work and the timelessness of it, and just how masterful it felt. I still am a bit gobsmacked of how I felt like it could have been, and I'll say it again, any of the greatest photographers in modern time, you know, all the way back 100 years would be proud of any of that work that you presented to us tonight. And the agelessness and the timelessness of a lot of it is I think what I'm really going to take away from tonight. And I'm going to be looking at my phone a little bit differently as well. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for putting us up with us, having a break a week. We do have a show already lined up for next week. Lucky, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So next week we have one of my very good friends on, Davey Rogers, and he's based in the south coast of New South Wales. And so what we're going to start doing is speaking more, rather than having general topics, we'll talk directly with photographers, and also about the area that they live. And we can learn a bit more about those places with people that are really passionate about those areas. They can show us a bit of their work and you know, what it's like to live in these places, and some of the great places that you can visit when it all opens back up again. So Davey will be on, and yeah, can't wait. He's an awesome guy. So he's tuned in on many of these episodes. So it's nice to have him on. So I think that's everything else. So I think what we'll do is wrap it up there. And thanks so much, everybody, for joining us again. And we'll see you at the same time.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks so much, Dex, as well, for joining us. Yeah, it was always an honor. So we'll see you same time next week, and on Wednesday. Catch you later.
See ya.
Have a good week, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.